Hi everyone, it's Professor Nin again here. Let's now briefly go into the third part of our chapter, which is about global stratification and inequality. We'll start out with defining global stratification and then look at different models of global stratification. So, what is global stratification? It is defined as a comparison of the wealth, economic stability, status, and power of countries as a whole. Sociologists studying global stratification analyze economic comparisons between nations. Income, purchasing power, and wealth are used to calculate global stratification. Global stratification also compares the quality of life that a country's population can have. So there are different models of global stratifications, and they all have one thing in common, which is they rank countries according to their relative economic status. So up until the 1980s, we have this Cold War based model, which is outdated now because it's used only up until the 1980s or the end of the Cold War. And in this models, countries are classified as either first world, that means that they're aligned with the Western Bloc, which includes the US and its allies. And then they're classified as second world if they're aligned with USSR, China, and their allies, so that would be the Eastern Bloc. And then finally, they're considered as third world if they're non-aligned and are neutral countries. So again, this model is outdated. It referenced the Cold War as the different alignments in the Cold War as ways to classify global stratification. It's outdated because Cold War has ended up until by the end of 1980s, the beginning of the end of the Cold War was at the end of 1980s. So this model has not been used anymore, and there are now other models has emerged in order to classify different countries and based on their status, the relative wealth compared to each other. So one of those models is economic. It revolves around ideas of economic development. It's based on measuring the industrial base as well as Human Development Index or HDI of those countries in order to see where they are relative to each other. These indexes are developed by the United Nations. So this model is a bit more neutral than the previous model that I just mentioned. It uses terms related to again, nations level industrialization and the HDI rather than politically where are they aligned with each other. So in this models, countries can be categorized in two groups: the more developed and the less developed. More developed nations have higher wealth, such as Canada, Japan, Australia. Less developed nations have less wealth to distribute among higher populations, including countries in Central Africa, South America, and some island nations. So here, as you can see, the world is slightly divided between north and south. So the green is, as you can see, mostly in the north, most, not all, but they are, most of them are considered as more developed nations. And then in the south, many of them are considered as less developed nations. So unlike the previous model, which the world is divided between east and west, now in this model, the world is slightly divided between north and south. Okay. And while they're divided between north and south, the countries in the north, as I mentioned earlier, are considered as more developed and usually have more wealth, and then many of them in the south are considered as less developed nations, in part because they have less wealth. Another metric for measuring global stratification is based on GDP, which is a gross domestic product, which is defined as a country's average national wealth per person. The GDP is calculated usually annually, one of two ways. One way is to totaling either the income of all citizens, or the other way is one way is to calculate calculated by totaling either the income of all citizens or the value of all goods and services produced in the country during that year. It also includes government spending, because the GDP indicates a country's productivity and performance. Comparing GDP rates help establish a country's economic health in relation to other country. The figures also establish a country's standard of living. So according to this analysis, the GDP standard of a middle-class nation represents a global average. In low-income countries, most people are poor relative to people in other countries. Citizens have little access to amenities such as electricity, plumbing, and clean water. People in low-income countries are not guaranteed education, and many are illiterate. The life expectancy of citizens is lower than in high-income countries. So here I've included a video for you about American privilege, because according to GDP ranking, U.S. is actually pretty high. We have a lot of access to all kinds of privileges that people in other countries do not have access to. And with that, we are done with part 3, and we'll move to part 4 in the next video.